The pressure.
or an explosion.
All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to another expert session number 89, Designing Tomorrow. And our guest today is John Very. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, John.
Correct.
And if not, you tell me off in a bit. Uh, my name is Carlos. We meet to solve what senior leaders actually face: uncertainty, rapid tech change, shifting consumers. And today is about preparing, not predicting. My co-host today is Zoe Roswell, co-founder of Turn Echo Turn Circular. Zoe is an established digital commerce leader in fashion and retail. She rose through Topshop to head of online trading, led global e-commerce and omnichannel at Jimmy Choo, and directed e-commerce at Urban Outfitters. Now she helps retailers scale circular and secondhand solutions and build sustainable commerce models. Zoe will jump in with questions about fashion, AI trends, and how digital commerce actually delivers change. And our guest, John Very, former lead futurist at John Lewis and former head of innovation at Burberry, founder of Stretch, where he helps companies design futures and navigate uncertainty. John applies foresight inside real operating environments, product stores, investment decisions, and leadership models. He foregrounds system thinkings, and the value of diverse cognitive styles in strategic work. John, thank you for joining. I always start our sessions with a controversial question. And the controversial question for you is, most companies say they plan for the future, but very few behave like the future matters. Where do leaders get foresight wrong?
So where did they get foresight wrong? I guess the fear. The companies that I've worked with, and whether exclusively as an employee or as an advisor or a strategist, fear defines kind of how far out businesses look. And I've come to learn that where there's more uncertainty, there's more fear, and businesses need certainty. That's the unfortunate world that we live in. And when we look for certainty, it really narrows down the kind of the world that we look at, which is a big risk because you're narrowing for the next kind of 6 months to a year maximum. And given where we are in 2025, I'd say that's even weeks in terms of change. So I think that's where businesses go wrong. They're driven by fear of knowing for certain what's going to happen. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm saying that there needs to be a way to permeate that thinking with a boundless kind of time horizon where you could keep one eye on what's coming. And that for me is something that I've learned firsthand.
Brilliant. I think you were sharing just before in the networking, in the pre-session that we have, how you became a futurist. And I like to explore a little bit your origin story, if you like. This is a very unconventional story, not finishing school. And so, how did you get there?
Yeah, sure. So I was raised in Peckham, southeast London. Some of you may not know of the place. You have to look it up, but it's quite famous for a comedy show called Only Fools and Horses, which I always end up getting people making jokes of me because of that, which is interesting. But there is a link to why I'm saying that. So the characters in that are frequently in a market trying to sell counterfeit goods. I'm not trying to say that I've ever tried to sell counterfeit goods, but my first ever job was when I was 11 years old. I was a barrow boy on the market. So every morning at 4 a.m. I would have to pull this enormous wooden barrow with these even larger metal wheels from the sheds to the high street. While everyone else felt like everyone else was asleep, I would be doing that. And so every morning I would do that, and then after school I would go back to the stall and then take all the veg down and then take everything back. And so that's the link for me. Unfortunately, Peckham is a lot different now to what it was back then. And I say unfortunate for me back then. It was an extremely violent place. Like, one of my friends on the stall was stabbed one evening. Fortunately, he survived. But my brother, who was only 9 at the time, was just feet away. it was definitely not the last time I experienced violence growing up. I really struggled in school though. Not it could have been because I was getting up at 4 a.m. every morning. I don't know, but I really
Okay.
struggled at school. Learning, reading, concentration. It turned out a couple of years ago, I found out I was dyslexic, but at the time I didn't know. So that really kind of played a part in my confidence growing up. I was constantly led to believe that there was something broken in my head. You know, why do you keep wanting to draw something? You need to learn how to do your times tables and your maths, you know, long division, short division, but it just wouldn't stick. I know now that that wasn't personal. It was just the way that teachers taught, and the people like me who learned differently it was just incompatible with that structure. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I left school at the age of 15. I tried to join the London Fire Brigade. I failed the interview. I passed the fitness test and the written test. It was amazing. And the written test, I was quite surprised. But apparently, I'm really good at like spatial reasoning and IQ tests, where it's more spotting the shapes that are out of place. I'm really, really good at that, as opposed to reading and writing. Not so good at that. But I failed. And so I wanted to go back and do the test again, but I had to wait a year. But something happened that was quite miraculous in a way. While I was waiting, I was offered a temporary job working for Shell in their post room in London. And so I started working in this post room. And what was really interesting is one morning, one of the directors just stopped at my desk and just sat there and asked me how did I feel? Like, simple question. Like, what did you do last night? Did you watch any TV? And like, first of all, I was like, why are you asking me this? What do you want? But actually, what really sank with me and I took away was kindness. No one in my life had ever spoken to me in that way. You know, I'd grow
Mhm.
up watching people stabbed, beaten up, or robbed. So it was quite interesting to see the other side of society. So anyway, I decided that I quite liked the safety of that, and so I continued on that vocational journey. One thing led to another. I ended up somehow working in Milan, like working for a e-solution company called Bravo Solution. They were an English-speaking company, but selling products to like the Home Office. I was selling body bags to the Home Office. Weird. I was selling school lunches to London 2012. This gives you an indication of it was 2010, ahead of the 2012 Olympics, and it was bizarre. But anyway, I got contacted by Burberry. They'd seen my CV somehow, and I didn't even know I had a CV. It was on Monster, and they said, "Oh, we're opening a new office in London. Would you come and help us move in? I can see that you've done audio visual." And I vaguely remember when I was at Shell, I put a projector in a room once, and I remember that would do. I put that on my CV, and so I was like, okay. So I met the VP of technology, John Wegg, lovely guy. I met him on the Friday, and he said, "Can you start Monday?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." I had no idea what I was going to be doing. I don't think he had any idea of what skills I had, but he basically offered me the job to start Monday. And so that started this amazing journey at Burberry. Within a year, I was in a boardroom setting up a call with every Burberry office in the estate. And a question came up about the retail, the runway to reality retail show that Burberry did, well, were doing that. This was the first one. And someone asked me the question, "John, do you have any input in terms of what type of screen we could use and audio?" I had no idea. But I suggested having an enormous screen on the wall and having seats down the side so that people in the shop can actually watch, and having state-of-the-art sound systems. And Christopher Bailey was in the room at the time. And he said, "I want that." And so then within 6 weeks, I was flying to 50 countries, helping the different teams in. I didn't do anything other than just tell people what to do, but telling people how and what the technology should look like, and had the best engineers doing all of the work. So it was amazing. And I was there for 5 years. I traveled the world with Burberry, did some amazing projects, including the Regent Street flagship store on Oxford Street. I was the lead engineer and architect on that. I created an interactive nail bar for their Covent Garden shop, which meant that people could try on nail varnish digitally without actually putting it on the fingers by using RFID and all sorts of cool gadgets. And then on the 5th year anniversary, I was contacted by John Lewis to, would you like to come and lead up a team here doing what you've done at Burberry? And so I said, yeah, sure. And then that became the start of being a futurologist for the John Lewis Partnership. And here we are.
So your role at Burberry wasn't necessarily futurologist, but it was around tech. It was about customer experience. It was about like the next evolution of what a retail experience could be.
Yes, I think the real trend is that no one has ever really known what job I do or should do, but they've wanted me to be involved in the most exciting and best projects.
Well, I mean, that Regent Street store was renowned for its for the experience. So kudos to you.
Christopher Bailey's brief to me for that was, I want to have a screen where people walk up the stairs and don't see 1 pixel. And to find a screen of that resolution, it took me quite a while, but I found one in San Francisco that used less power than a hairdryer. And it was like a laser phosphor technology that was cold to touch, and managed to get a whole bunch of it flown over to the UK to test, and for Christopher to approve the quality of it in a showroom. But yeah, it's less, I think, boiling down what I do is less about futures and innovation. I think they're tools in my repertoire in some degree. It's actually influencing people to think differently, to consider change, suspending disbelief enough so that they can dream themselves. Because I go back to what I said in the intro outside of this call, right, around the network in the beginning. Fear is a big catalyst for blocking some of these ideas. I was fortunate at Burberry that you had Christopher and Angela, who built the most amazing playground for people to go and create stuff like that. I have that expectation when I go into every business now. It's probably unrealistic in 2025, but it really helps me in terms of think differently.
I'm curious about that transition from being, it's because people, and I'm maybe fortunately, I don't think in boxes. Like what I would get very annoyed in Denmark is that the first question that people would ask me is, so what did you do? And what did you study? And I'm like, can we build a relationship first? I don't know if that is even relevant, but I understand, like, especially when you're working for a business, the need of thinking in templates and boxes, like, so I find that very interesting. So you were working for this company in Milan. They spoke English, and someone gave you thought your profile was very interesting, and they gave you let's say a chance and say, hey, you come and work for Burberry. I don't know what you're going to do here, but you're a curious guy, and maybe you can help us with your sense of curiosity can help us with something here, and I don't know what really is. And so that took some courage from that leader to say, okay, I will bet on this guy who think differently. And then this other journey into going into John Lewis and having this formal title. They wanted like a guy who could design future. So that's that part of the journey. I find it very interesting. Can you perhaps
I guess that transition was an interesting one. So at Burberry, I was in, there was 1,100 people in the global estate, right, where everyone had the same way of thinking. It was this kind of pioneering, very much like the founder of Burberry, like, we're going to create, we're going to imagine, we're going to innovate. And then going into John Lewis, where there's suddenly 80,000 employees, you're all the same, you're all employees, everyone gets a share of the bonus. It's slightly different. It's not to say it was any less innovative, but the playground changes. First of all, you have you have a political landscape, right? That some people are being measured for what they deliver in a Burberry and John Lewis are two very different retailers. So John Lewis, was a fundamentally was a pure retailer where they had their shops, they had their online, and the products they sold were there was thousands and thousands of different assortments that they would sell. Their relationship with suppliers, so they, in a way, they were working with the kinds of Burberrys, so that relationship changed. So the audience for me shifted, whereas when I joined, I made a beeline for the most influential people in that business, mainly because I had an opportunity at the beginning to prove in the first 6 months that I am valuable. After that, I believe that you kind of lose momentum. And so I went round and I contacted the like of Craig Ingalls, who was the marketing director at the time, who was accountable for all of the Christmas adverts that we loved, and similar kind of people across the business, with the main aim of, hi, my name's John, this is what I do, this is what I've done. I'd love to work with you. I'd love to add value to your team. I never had to do that at Burberry because I kind of came in and was able to grow up. Burberry was where I developed my identity. John Lewis is absolutely where I learned how to apply that identity to tangible pieces of work. Whereas at Burberry, there wasn't really a project ownership thing, where at John Lewis, I was responsible for being a catalyst for new pieces of work, delivering those new pieces of work, setting the strategy for those new pieces of work. What did I learn? It was extremely lonely at times because I had to be quite resilient, thick-skinned, words I don't really like using, but I was quite vulnerable at times, because you hear stories where, not stories, you hear words where people say, this is not how we do things in this team, or this is not how, we do things differently. And that was very early on. Thankfully, over time, I was able to forge a path where I was able to influence, the most senior people in the business to think differently. Most of that actually was down to creating a community and storytelling rather than just pure making stuff like it was at Burberry. So I was able to develop a new muscle by joining John Lewis, which is great, and that's doing me wonders now as I've launched my own business. So yeah, it's interesting. It's I wouldn't go back and do it any other way at all.
I mean, the differences between Burberry and John Lewis, not only just the type of product they sell to, and their customer and their client base. I mean, Burberry obviously has this kind of feeling of innovation, whereas with John Lewis, their partnership structure and setup is obviously pretty incredible. But you've got a huge amount of history, and as you talked about, a lot of cogs in the wheel to influence, to drive, to to bring on that journey with you. So like I think it's really interesting how you can help to drive that change and that change of mindset within such a large organization, where a lot of the times, just not because of the complexity of the business, the right hand necessarily always talk to the left hand. Ensuring that everyone is on the same journey is challenging.
Yeah, agree. And there'll be some things that I got wrong for sure along the way, but I feel like that persistent kind of message, it kind of, I wanted to create, I wanted my behaviors to be relevant to the actions that other people should have. So I was never saying something that I wouldn't do myself. So I went to so at the time it was the John Lewis Management Board. So you had Andy Street, who was the MD at the time, and you had Paula Nichols, you had Paul Kobe, Mark Lewis. You had a really senior team. So anyway, I managed to get in. They had a lunch every Monday, and I managed to get a seat. I don't know how I did it, but I got in there. I managed to get a seat in the room where I was basically singing for my supper. I wanted to create a small kind of maker space in the basement of 171 Victoria Street at the time. So anyway, I wheeled up with like a screen and my laptop, and I basically sat there while they were eating their roast chicken and potatoes, and just started saying, I want to create this space by the bins. I don't need any money. I just need you to let me have this cupboard. It's right next to the bins. I need you to help me take, not help me, but let me kind of get someone to help me take all of the stuff out of the cupboard. And within 6 months, I'm going to show you some amazing stuff. And it happened. And so they went around the room and they approved it. And from that moment on, every month they would come and see what I was doing. We had the design teams using a 3D printer in there to do prototyping. We had a interactive sofa studio that made it into shops, where customers could use 3D printed sofas and fabrics to visualize what that would look like, as opposed to just going up to a wall of fabrics and then seeing shapes and cards. They could bring it together. And so we were actually seeing some really interesting stuff kind of go live. Then it evolved into lots of different roles, and one of the ones that I really enjoyed doing was working in kind of the ventures team, where they were, you know, spinning up new businesses, which was a lot of fun to be part of.
John, I want to move on to our next topic here, which is perhaps talk a little bit about trends and your framework. And yesterday, I had a conversation with Zoe, and I asked her to be as selfish as possible because she is leading something which I find it fascinating, and for sure it should be the future. You know, this whole circular economy. So walk us through perhaps some of the signals that you're tracking towards 2026. And Zoe, please be selfish.
I'll let John start first, and then I'll dig in with my specific questions.
Yeah. So interestingly, I released this list of 10 things that I've been looking at for 2026 and beyond, and maybe at some point we can talk about the framework of how we got to this. But in terms of the kind of the things, I guess I'll boil it down into 2 themes, if you like, rather than go through all 10. So one theme is like human and machine collaboration. Like this for me is like fundamentally, and it feels like everyone will be looking at this go, oh, it's more AI. I think it's a lot deeper than just it being AI. And there's probably links to circularity and in lots of different ways here, both good and bad, right? So I think if we're looking at human and machine collaboration, we're absolutely moving from relying on one single AI machine, if you like. So for example, ChatGPT, I feel like going beyond next year and the year beyond that, I really do feel like we're going to start having to orchestrate like a team of specialized agents. So if you look at my background, I've probably got like 4 or 5 different machines doing different things, whether that's running code on a server or it is using 2 front ends, so Gemini and ChatGPT, Grammarly. There's like a few things that are kind of working together. I think kind of the linking to the specific trends in what I wrote, there's this like this network of like personal agencies. So like agent to agent. So I feel like it will be less around a human using an agent. And I think I'm pretty certain actually it's starting to happen now. We're going to have kind of agents working on our behalf. So I might have at some point my banking agent engaging with John Lewis's agent to look at what are the best deals for me when it comes to like business travel or credit cards and what have you. And it will be less about, there's an amazing kind of emotional music to their ad. That won't matter. It will be more around the trust, which I think is quite interesting. And then more explicitly on the kind of what it will feel like, I started to look at kind of these more like synthetic companions in the workplace. I'm really fascinated at the moment around robotics, and it feels like there's something quite interesting there around what if you had no choice and had to work with a companion, basically a robot, what would that feel like? What would it be? So rather than having a buddy at work with kind of onboarding and, you know, going to them with how do I get to here? How do I go there? Or you go to the intranet, there's almost like a meshing of the intranet and a machine that you can speak to. Whether we like it or not, we speak to machines now every day. So we're becoming quite good at speaking to machines. Some of us are not getting as good. Some of us are quite scared still of speaking to machines. But I feel like that there is a digital or an AI language that we must overcome. So that's kind of one theme, and then the second theme is probably on the inverted side of that, is around protecting our identity. Excuse me. So I've been really interested in looking at kind of like the theme around the rise of the off switch. So if everything is on and always on, like how do we turn this off? Slow identity, seen already in Australia. I don't know if this actually gone into law now, but under 16s will be banned from, or social media will be banned from under 16 use, which I think, to be honest, it might be a step too far, but I think it needs something to change something. Especially if I look at my 13-year-old's behaviour on his phone. But then also something more closer, we look at schools in Scotland and other places in the country now, that when you arrive in school, you dock your phone in a pouch that's locked until the end of the day. And
same in Denmark,
so I think that's quite interesting. So
my daughter's school's just introduced that, actually. So my son is in year 11 and he's been allowed to take his smartphone into school and still is, but my daughter's just joined year 7 and they're not allowed smartphones. So her phone lives at home during the day, and I'm very much for it. I think the off switch and I think the Australian ban on social media and certain channels for under 16s is actually a really good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there's probably quite a subjective point from my point of view where at times I can be a bit of a helicopter parent. So it's probably more my vulnerability than actually what should be real or not. So, and this is an important part of having these conversations, why a lot of the work that we talk about here shouldn't be done in isolation. It should be done as a community so that you can surface lots of the different views, because ultimately you need to be empathetic, and otherwise if I was designing it on what I think is right, be wrong 80% of the time. And so the signal says one thing and then the scenario would be different. So it is culturally quite a collaborative sport.
But I think the agentic AI, agentic commerce conversation is only going to evolve rapidly. I think it poses a really interesting question around retail specifically, and what that retail experience is, and particular from a high street and physical retail point of view as well. And I guess I'm curious to see how you see that evolving, because, you know, how does humans and machines, we know that especially in the UK, you know, the death of the high street has been talked about quite significantly, and it is tough out there. So what does that mean for physical retail?
Yeah, and I have thought about this, because I feel like every step of the way, the human should be the de facto in how you define what it is. And so it goes back to kind of having the synthetic companion. So I go into a shop right now. Let's pick on John Lewis Bluewater, and I've had a similar experience in different shops. I go to the shoe section and I ask for a size 10. They say, wait a minute, I'm going to go and look out back. 7 minutes will pass. Slight exaggeration. Maybe it's 6, maybe it's 9. And then they'll come back and say, I'm sorry, we don't have those. And so what an amazing thing to actually outsource that. Of course, they can look on a tablet or a machine or something, but there needs to be a way to maybe even like gamify this a bit. We're seeing it in shop, like you go to Bluewater and there's an army of robots cleaning on their own. Like, I think culturally and behaviorally, we're starting to see this happen, where it's great not seeing people clean, but then if you think about that morally, like some people have to do that because that's their route into different types of work, or because they study, they need to have these level jobs to be able to I don't know, I can't quite lay out my perspective on that, but something's not quite, I don't know, I'm caught between the crosshairs on that one.
I'm curious whether retail becomes more of a service-led industry again, rather than a purely transactional industry, and whether the technological shifts help drive that, because we've kind of moved away as an industry from an industry that is really about how can I make sure you've got the right thing for you at the point that you want it, to how can I sell you more stuff. And I wonder whether that service can be reintroduced through technology.
Yeah, I agree. I really do agree, and I feel like that is the context for the conversation, is like what the experience in the shop is less about buying stuff. It's, you know, it sounds quite cliche, but it is more experiential. Like, so therefore the work needs to be done more in the background, where if I need a pair of size 10s, I don't need to go in and ask someone, do you have a pair of size 10s? I already know that. Or, you know, there is another kind of filter in that process that means you get what you need. I feel like that kind of need analysis is something that's quite important for us to be looking at whenever I'm talking about future. The need is quite an important one. Also now, and it's no longer just the need of the human, it's the need of the machine. Like the machine will have a load of needs as well. And
just to Carlos's point about being selfish and trying to embed some element of circularity into this conversation. I mean, look, I've worked through e-commerce, you know, even when e-commerce wasn't a thing and no one was really that confident in the very early stages that anyone wanted to shop online. So, and you know, now look where e-commerce is. That's an evolution, and I feel like the shift towards re-commerce and extending the life of products and resale, repair, refurbishment, all of these programs is just like the kind of the next phase that is enabled by technology and access, because, you know, historically secondhand has only really been, you know, available in charity shops. You've got to go hunting, whereas e-commerce has made that product discovery much easier, much quicker, much faster to find that one thing that you want and need at the point where you need it. But to your point about fear, and I'm curious to see, you know, to understand whether you see this happening, this shift towards sustainability, this kind of inherent knowledge within a business that business has to become better for people and for planet, and obviously still drive a profit, and how this evolution and this shift in customer behavior can drive that change within a business when the fear is there from the beginning. Like, how do we make this work? I don't think we can sell, you know, individual secondhand products. Sounds too hard, sounds unprofitable. It's a departure from, you know, what we do currently, and we've got no capacity potentially to even think about this whilst we're firefighting trying to drive sales of new products.
Yeah, I don't think I have a definitive answer. I guess my personal feel on this is that, you know, you see the messaging that's coming out from a lot of different places, that actually the sustainability point is maybe no longer as prioritized as it should. I can completely disagree with that, but also I do feel like it's probably like a misframing of it, whereas the sustainability is probably not the objective.
No. The objective I think for retailer is like, what do your customers need and want, and how do you deliver a service and an experience that caters against that? And when shoppers are actively choosing to buy pre-owned versus new, particularly within apparel at the moment, I think there's a really interesting shift in mindset that needs to happen to recognize that behavior change is happening, and you need to evolve your business to do it. But there's a lot of fear, to your point.
There's a lot of fear. There's also, you no longer competing with the needs of the consumer. You have the needs of the supplier, you know, and then suddenly, if you look at this through the different lenses, you're no longer looking at it from a societal lens. You're looking at it from an economical lens, and then the environmental one becomes a little bit more faded, a little bit. So I feel like that advising businesses, it becomes less around like focusing on sustainability and focusing on the points that you've just made, and being really clear on actually you're removing the waste, you know, by having these super efficient processes, by being really clear on what the customer needs and how you deliver to those needs. I feel like I don't think I'd ever believe myself by saying this, but I feel like less is more in this regard, and focusing on the kind of the bits that are closer to the horizon, but having a way to augment so that you could see like there's a value here. And then it becomes no longer a decision around what do we do as well as doing this, making a decision around how do we leapfrog some of the intermediate processes. That's where foresight and innovation, you know, these future innovations become quite interesting, where a business suddenly decides not to just do like an incremental step to get to this next version. Actually, let's leap kind of whole point 1, point 2, point 3 and go straight to point 4. Like it really rips up the whole kind of business model architecture. I think
yeah, I guess it takes some very visionary leaders to do that.
Yeah.
John, we'll start inviting our community in. Zoe, thanks. Just so we also can have more members participating in the conversation, as I said earlier on. And Hendrik is he's a marketplace analyst, has a very cool newsletter. So Hendrik, go ahead, make your remarks and ask your question.
So I listened to today's conversation, and it made me think about two things. So I shared in the chat a news article from a few weeks ago in which the Indonesian government told local marketplaces to ban thrift stores. And the reason was that the government found that thrift stores were being abused as a way for Chinese platforms to import goods into the market and essentially hurt the local garment industry. So for those who, I live in South Africa, and I think for me, the conversation that I continue to come back to is two things. I think as retailers and people who work in commerce, we need to be very mindful of, you know, where we work. I know I'm stating the obvious here, but I live in a continent where agentic commerce, I think, is like a decade away at minimum, because we can't even do the fundamentals. Secondly, I felt like I've been hearing my late dad last couple of months, where dad said, like in the 50s, when he used to go to the store, you would go to the door, you would open the door, and then you go stand in the queue in front of a table. And at the table was the salesperson, and the salesperson would be walking in the store, collecting whatever you needed. And at the end of the day, they go back to you and then say, basically, here are your items that you wanted, and here we go. To John's point about, you know, not having shoes, I'm 6'5", and I can tell you there's nothing that frustrates me more than going into a clothing store and being told that we don't have the right size jeans for you. I mean, couldn't you have told me that like an hour ago? Or I just think that we have to be mindful of the fact that when we bring technology into retail, we are making a sensory event that is social by design, focused on performance and efficiency, which kind of for me goes to John's point about it feels to me the incentives aren't aligned. There we go.
Yeah, great point. Good point.
Is it so? No question, or it's
I
more
just
like
thought I'll just make a statement
remark.
because
Yeah.
one, I think this is a very interesting conversation, and I think between Zoe and John, we've seen publicly the conversation that I believe is happening inside brands all over. I think John has the ability to tell us what happened inside a luxury business with Burberry and their challenge that they face. And Zoe, I think, will be able to tell us, all the challenges that brands are facing. Because for those of us who have worked in commerce, I think in most cases we are early adopters. So, I think to the point I'm seeing in Europe, there's way more momentum about buying pre-owned devices or pre-owned clothing, whilst in South Africa, vintage and, pre-owned clothing is like a sliver of the market. So yes, Carlos, sorry, I know I'm completely hogging the mic here, but I thought I'll make a statement rather asking a question, because in case we just need to be mindful of the fact that, we can sometimes become very focused on our own market and our own thoughts on a specific market. Not to put any criticism on anybody. I just want to be the voice of reason here.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. And I guess my response is that when we're looking at these kind of future opportunities, that there is a very important local lens that needs to be applied to make it relevant. And being selfish feels like quite a good theme for today. So there is an element of selfishness to me. However, in terms of sharing what's local to me, what I would say is whenever I work with a business, there is a listening point up front where you actually listen to, well, what is the context and the cultural differences that's within this business. So not even geography. So if I work with retail, I get one perspective. I've been doing some work within the UK house building sector. It's completely different. They're probably 15, 20 years behind because it's an extremely manual sector.
Yep.
Buying bricks is buying bricks. It's been the same for X. But being able to come in and have a different perspective, well, actually, how do you remove the waste of bricks? Like, on the conveyor belt, there's probably 30% of the bricks that are damaged because they're just being thrown into a bin at the end. Is there a way of automating and using digital to help that? Probably not. It probably must remain being a human doing it because it's such an intimate part of the process. So I agree.
But I think to the point that, and we haven't touched on it, and maybe it's a good segue into it. If as a business you have a framework for thinking about what the future is, what your customers are doing, what they're telling you, what the signals are, if you have a framework for listening to them and then thinking about what that means for your business, doesn't really matter so much where you're what market you're in or what problem that you're looking at. It's a mindset, it's a way of evolving your business. And I think that is fundamental. And it's probably the difference between businesses that will survive and businesses that don't survive, because they have that foresight to be thinking about what is coming and adapt and evolve towards it, rather than what I see very frequently is, this is the way that we've always done it, or like, trade's really bad, all we're focusing on right now is how we just sell more product because we've got to hit our numbers. And that's to your point, Hendrik, about kind of performance being the ultimate driving goal. So is it the framework, is it the mindset, is it the leadership that needs to change, and how do you go about doing that, and what's the framework for that?
I tend to believe that I think it boils down to company leadership. So I view two companies in two different places. So one is the global business Amazon's culture, where they continue to disrupt themselves. Yes, I know that the word disruption can cause all kinds of people wanting to throw things at me on the screen. So, pardon me. But I think the other one is, we have a local retailer, Checkers, who's the largest retailer on the African continent. And what they've done over the last 18 months is they have embraced technology to ensure that they can drive convenience in a manner which they couldn't previously. I think to John's point earlier about, joining Burberry versus joining John Lewis. If I look back 10 years ago, omnichannel was barely a word mentioned. Now we have more people talking on about it, but we also have people ensuring that you can have multiple contact places with brands. My biggest thing is just we, as a sector, I think we need to go back to understanding what does the consumer want, and how can we help the consumer in getting that. Thoughts?
I agree. I don't think enough businesses listen to their customers, or think about how agentic commerce is changing their behavior, or how they're using AI in their everyday lives, and what that means for their business. I just don't think they do. There's not enough of that happens. But I'm curious to how you make that happen, to John's, kind of framework.
I also think that there's a huge amount of assumptions when people are talking about customers. I think 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, you could create a persona of a customer, and it would be within 30% of being right, and that's enough. I think now customers' expectation and needs are changing every day based on external factors, social media. John Lewis yesterday just launched their shop. How are people shop, live, and look? If you look at how people are shopping right now, fascinating. It's fascinating, and I think that should be factored in. It's the same way businesses shouldn't really create a strategy anymore. The strategy should be to not have a strategy, and to how can you be agile in a way that you are responding to the immediate shifts in customer behavior. But that's probably why I'm not leading a business, but I feel like there's probably a middle ground where this kind of painful kind of restlessness around how people are changing from the ages of 14 up to retirement and beyond, because we talked before, Ryan, around aging population and the way people live. People are living differently, therefore their needs are changing. That I think there's something quite that we should be looking at in terms of those shifts as well. We also look then in terms of the geopolitical landscape that is impacting customer expectations, but it's also impacting how people get products. So it goes back to the circularity question. Things are no longer, being flown, or they are being flown or going by ship. It's mad. Maybe we're going back to the beginning where things are less planet travel. Maybe it's going to be that, you don't have a Brussels sprout this time of the year, or you don't have an avocado. Like that's as painful as that sounds. Is that where we're going to? I don't know.
I actually want to ask you a question, and that goes back to your framework, John, which is you mentioned how people shop, and how's that different then? Is it like I'm looking for inspiration on social media, which is I think so, and it's so interesting because it always goes back to my dad. Like my father, he produces dress shirts like the one I'm wearing. And he was a guy who built his company. He used to be on advertising his company on the television, and he was the persona. He was the guy doing the advertisement there. And now when he has to be on social, like he still wants to be the guy. But when you're buying a shirt, and that's a discussion I had with him multiple times, like you need multiple voices, kind of like Evolve is not about me, it's about Zoe, it's about Hendrik. And by the way, I'm just one of the voices here, but I see the same for a fashion brand. So it's nice to have him as like the initiator of that movement, but you need multiple voices because people are different, and so if they can mirror themselves in that that shirt, like it's not about my dad. And I think it has there's a with the demographics and how people are changing. I think social media plays such a big role there, right? And I see a reluctancy, if that's the right word in English, or maybe difficulty in understanding those that movement. Like it's social first, and And even I tell him, like, do you observe? Because you need to be conscious how you use social media. Because he didn't have a phone until 2016, like a phone, and then now he's on social all the time. And I'm like, can you observe your behavior? Because you go to social media to consume stuff, but when it goes back to your business, it seems that you can't apply what you do in your life. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think on that point, it's fascinating. Like search in itself, I think, is probably the biggest disrupted digital place at the moment. So I don't know if you saw this week, Google released their 2025 trends in search. So there was 8.5 billion searches made in 2025. Was it? I can't remember the actual, but I think it was actually in 1 month. There was like 99,000 searches per second. So you'd have to look at the math on that to work it out. But basically, what I thought was really interesting, that we're still very predictable. People are still typing Google into Google.
Yeah,
like
I saw that.
Is one thing that I think is really, really interesting. But the reason why I said that, like, social and the internet are quite different at the moment. Like, if I search, I go to TikTok or Instagram Reels. So, for example, I was in Hilton Head in the summer, so South Carolina, and we wanted to find somewhere to go to eat. And what we did is we actually typed into TikTok some cool places to eat in Hilton Head. And so what you then get is you get the people that have been there eating, sharing firsthand their experiences. And what an amazing way to search. I do feel also that AI is, like, Gemini, I think, was the highest growth in the Google trends. Gemini and Cricket, which is quite interesting, both culturally and digital. And so I feel like that is going to disrupt. I look at my son, and again, as much as I hate sometimes his behavior on his phone, he uses AI in WhatsApp, and I didn't do this. So in WhatsApp, he accesses Meta AI in there. So, that has become his search bar in terms of not just learning stuff.
Can I ask a question? So I like agentic search. I think is just become more prevalent. We all search terms are much more colloquial these days. Like, I need a red dress with long sleeves for a wedding in the summer, whatever it is. That's a natural shift, and therefore moving to agentic search, where you get much richer recommendations and it's much more personalized. I'm excited about. I actually have a question around AI generated content. So to your point, Carlos, around being relevant to the customer, gender, age, kind of hair color, whatever it is. Not many brands are really fully delivering AI generated content at the moment across everything, but I suspect that it's going to go that way, which then raises a huge question mark over kind of the photography industry, model industry, kind of model rights, all of that IP protection, etc. And I'm curious whether you have a view on kind of the direction of travel there and how quickly it might evolve.
Yeah, I suspect that a lot of this is already happening in secret, and people are not sharing it, which I think is a consequence of there needing to be some type of purity test when using AI. Like, you see it on LinkedIn or social media. If someone has posted something with an M dash, you've been using AI. That's the worst thing. Whereas actually, when I wrote my book, the publisher actually asked me to include M dashes. Right. So there is a balance between the two. I also feel like the point between, if you're a designer and you've used Photoshop to create your output, and there is no photography done on this planet that hasn't gone through some form of digital retouching. Yeah. On a computer, they even use AI now in Adobe to do it, but no one would ever frown at that being done. So I feel like we're going through a state where at the moment there is a fear that people will be replaced by digital. I think it's the complete opposite. Whereas I think that people will have tools that use digital, that will just make more people have the ability to be more creative, to do a lot of these tools that only a certain few could do. Is that right? Not sure just yet. I think it's exciting because it means that people that don't have access to education can suddenly use the tools that, I don't know. I'm still a bit swayed on that, but I feel like it's going to be a really interesting way to amplify our own skills.
Brilliant. We are approaching 55 minutes plus the networking session, so about to wrap up. Zoe, again, prepare your final questions. Be selfish. John, maybe I want to ask you about going back to your framework. Could you then give us an example outside of fashion? I thought it was very interesting, the example with the bricks and some other industries. I think we tend to, especially on LinkedIn land, there's so many pundits and gurus, and I get tired. People, telling what you should do, and I think especially in e-commerce, there's a certain lingo that you see, and I think the industries sometimes they make stuff so you don't understand. So I like looking at other industries and having different perspectives, and perhaps you could share some of your work and your framework, how do you get to design possible futures, for a different industry than fashion.
Yeah, sure. So in regard to the framework, I mentioned it before, it's S3 framework. So the S3 is the signal system and scenario. And to kind of break that down and then give you some examples within the signal and then within the system and then the scenario, and then maybe one final kind of like wild card from the 2026 that's gone through the framework. So I try to keep it as simple as possible. So whenever I do work for businesses, there needs to be a tangible science behind when I talk about specific futures, just to kind of make it a little bit more tangible. So the weak signal is absolutely the thing that drives all of this. So these signals are more often than not ignored because they're weird, underdeveloped, and mostly unquantifiable. There's no data to suggest that they will amount to something. But that's why I love these, why everyone is focusing on what's trending in the world. There is an obsession over trends, as I've just described with the Google stuff. These weak signals really does kind of give us a glimpse in terms of what's coming. So giving you an example of a weak signal, a simple one we've already covered really, is teams kind of quietly, in secret at times, integrating personal AI bots, agents into their workflow without any kind of real policy or playbook. So hold on to that thought. So then you have like the system. So these are the systems of understanding that if these signals were to mature, what system would generate as a consequence. And thinking this way really helps you to kind of force, you're almost kind of reverse engineering a world where this signal has been created. So bearing in mind that first signal, an example system would be the quiet adoption of AI signals, a shadow AI ecosystem within companies. So this means that people start to, have a fear of missing out and want that augmentation faster. So when there is a process that isn't automated, there is a revolt. People want it faster, quicker. Therefore, the leaders in the business also want it faster, quicker, which we're already starting to see. So then onto the scenarios. So the scenarios is I guess, where you have that blank canvas where if the signal is X, the system is encompassing the signal. What are the future scenarios that could be a consequence of these these nodes within this constellation. And so I guess there is a mix between spotting these scenarios that naturally just appear or creating them. But what I would say, they're subtle shifts, maybe contradictions and emerging opportunities. More opportunities than not, definitely something positive that you'd want to create, because we've already spoke about, when we talk about futures, there's a whole bunch of dystopian futures that could happen. The role of futures is about identifying preferred futures. So an example outcome, AI becomes, when we spoke about your teammate, every role has a personal intelligence layer that handles admin, analysis, planning, memory. And we're already seeing it. Workday, a system that I've worked with in the past, very analog in terms of engaging with data entry and training. So this could be your way of, you're not just alone in this digital world. You have a way to almost embody the rules, the instructions that are more helpful, more accessible. So you don't have to just read or listen. You can actually understand it first off. And so that's kind of the framework in a nutshell. And there was one final one that I wanted to talk about. So this is on LinkedIn if you want to do it. And the maturity rating of this signal is kind of new, it's quite framing, although the thing itself is quite old. And this was like the screenshot economy. And I've always been fascinated with, in my catalog, my portfolio on my phone and my iPad, the amount of screenshots I have. There's tens of thousands of them. And so just looking at this screenshot is becoming kind of like the primary artifact of digital life. So it's like a holding memory, evidence, and story all in once. And the signal, so these are the clues, like screenshots are now the lingua franca of digital proof. If ever I do something and my partner wants to challenge me, she sends me a screenshot of what I've said. So it's like, I can't argue with that at all. So they're used as receipts, legal evidence, social currency. We see a wave of these new apps emerging solely just to verify and organize these screenshot captures. So like what pattern is emerging around that? Digital trust, very much hinges on these captured moments. So an ecosystem around being able to not only understand, but verify the context and provenance. So provenance is quite interesting here. And then the scenario, specifically for 2026, albeit it's happening now and could stretch out beyond 2026. So the verification of screenshots becomes standard for customer service disputes. So businesses having a way of accepting screenshots as evidence, I think, is going to be quite interesting. So these businesses will manage, and ourselves, screenshot archives as carefully as the photos alongside them. I think it's quite an interesting one to end on.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Zoe.
Oh my gosh, so many questions, to be honest. I think, look, from a very selfish point of view, if I'm thinking about my preferred future is that every retailer offers circular models, preferably using the turn software to support. So what then, what needs to be true in that circumstance? The signals that I'm looking for, the system, is that what I've designed already? I mean, I guess, and how do we bring retailers on this journey to recognize these signals and to understand that future?
So sorry, can I come back with a question to you to
Sure.
be controversial? So your preferred future for you, why should that be your preferred future, and then why should that be my preferred future?
Well, my preferred future is because for a number of factors. It is the world creates too many products, 80% of which get thrown away when they could be reused or repurposed. And our planet is in trouble. So there is an inherent kind of, personal survival element of ensuring that we are recapturing value from products that are just going to waste and not killing our planet in the process. But it comes from an inherent love of the retail industry, I think, as well, and wanting to see it evolve and adapt and become stronger in today's environment. rather than solely relying on, you know, an old model that is outdated.
Thanks.
I'm not sure that that is a, yeah.
I would add to what
Total
Zoe just said. I would add to what Zoe just said is I think we are all desperately wanting the world to be a better place because of technology. Whether it's retail or our personal lives, we want the technology to make life a better place. And I think the landfill situation is one that I think most people need to be aware of, which they are not. But I think to Zoe's point about the need for brands, I think we will most probably see, and this is not going to go down well, but I think it's going to most probably happen. I wouldn't be surprised if we see regulation in Europe happening in the next 5 years, where retailers and brands are required to have circularity as part of their business model. Because I just think it's, for me, as somebody that spends a lot of time in data, I think we need to understand that there's lots of green shoots for opportunity, but I'm stating the obvious here. We need to do the basics well, and the basics for me is if I buy a Nike shirt, and I'm wearing one now, and it basically has a hole in it a year after the buying. I need to be able to tell Nike, one, your production value sucks, but two, can you potentially give me an alternative that has better long-term value? Because I think we are seeing with Temu and Shein that the single-use economy is not just now in plastic bags, it's also in apparel.
Yeah, I agree.
Brilliant. All right, so we'll have to finish this session. Unfortunately, we're on, I think, 1 hour and 6 now. John, time to sell. So please promote your books. We'll put in on YouTube as well. We'll promote you, create video snippets and all of that. But how can people find you and know more about Stretch and your work?
Yeah, no, great. So I wrote a book about my journey with neurodiversity, dyslexia, ADHD. It's called The Power of Different. It's on Amazon. All profits are going to the British Dyslexia Association, which is really important for me, which kind of ties into what I'm doing through Stretch. I launched Stretch a year ago as a tool to help businesses think differently. And so I work with businesses such as Virgin, Legal and General, housing companies like Persimmon, Jersey Electricity, who are obviously based in Jersey, DFDS, shipping companies. So a mixture of businesses that are looking to challenge and think differently on multiple horizons, not just looking forward. I think it's a bit of a red herring. Although I'm a futurologist, a lot of my work actually starts on the other two temporal lenses, so looking at hindsight and insight. So being able to paint a picture that kind of goes back as well as look forward. When we do that, suddenly reality becomes a lot more malleable because we've already done a lot of this stuff, made the same mistakes we've made for centuries. So there's a lot of learning. And ultimately, the future will just be a reimagining of what we've already done, but just enabled in different ways. And so, yeah, my website is stretch.consulting. So I'm also on LinkedIn if anyone wants to chat. I do a lot of public speaking. Happy to help in any way. It's been great to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Hendrik, you always do the final remarks. Would you like to say something and wrap this up? You're our man.
So one, I think today's discussion for me highlights it again, how as somebody that works in commerce, I think we need to pay more attention to the relationship with retail. E-commerce and retail shouldn't be fighting one another. We should be learning from one another. That's the one point. The second point is, I didn't make the comment sarcastically earlier, but I think we need to have stories like John's and Zoe's to essentially help brands not make the same mistakes twice. And I think conversations like this weekly makes me believe that, one, the world can be a better place. One, two, we should be speaking to one another more. But three, the most important thing is that lifelong education happens when there's new things coming on your horizon which you are interested in. So that having a mind that's consistently thinking about things and challenging things, it's not overrated. And to John's point about, you know, hindsight, insight, and the future, I wish more brands would take that as a framework to start off, because they don't. And this is why I love the community, because every Thursday we get somebody and we get people in that basically just makes me think differently about tomorrow and the next year. So Carlos, thank you to you and Gustavo. Zoe, thanks for joining us. John, thanks for basically breaking my mind today with your 3S framework. And yes, Carlos, once again, you did it. You guys did
Thanks,
it.
dude. Thank you. John, thanks so much. Zoe, thank you. Yeah, and I'll see you all next Thursday. John, I'll send you a note on WhatsApp. All right?
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.